It's Rhema Afternoons with Tom and Di. Joining us on the show, the Rev Frank Ritchie. We've gone from being in the season of Lent. We're in a brand new season now and we're about to talk about it. But firstly, welcome, Frank, to the show.
Oh,
Kia ora.
always good to hang out with you two.
Lovely.
When it came across that we wanted to talk about Easter as a season, Frank, I thought this was really interesting because here we are on the other side of Easter. We reflect on Jesus's crucifixion, but also his resurrection. But when you read through the Gospels, it's kind of a weird space as you read stories of the disciples coming to terms with this. And, is there something in us continuing to reflect on what Jesus's resurrection means for us in the season after Easter?
Yeah, this is why I've loved moving into embracing a tradition that has the Christian calendar. And so Easter, or as it's traditionally known, Paschaltide, is not just a weekend. It's not just, or even just one day, where I know that some churches will have everything happen and reflect on Easter on one day, Resurrection Sunday. But if you follow the traditional calendar, Easter or Paschaltide is a whole season that goes from Resurrection Sunday through to Pentecost Sunday, which this year will happen on May 19th. So you've got almost 2 months of reflecting on the resurrection, and you go over the stories of the resurrection. So you think about stories like the disciples on Emmaus Road and Jesus meeting them on Emmaus Road. You think about the time Jesus appears in the room to the disciples, the story of dealing with Thomas. You think about Jesus meeting the disciples on the side of the Lake of Galilee and eating with them. All of those stories we reflect on during the period of Easter. Now, what I really love about this is it means that Easter doesn't just come and go in this flurry and then we're back into normal life. But if you were someone who was doing Lent in the lead up to Easter, where we intentionally focused on fasting and prayer and charity, and we began by reflecting on our mortality, and then we reflect on the more somber things of life, our need for God, then we flip that when we get into the Easter season and we start focusing on life, joy, celebration. So for those who life might be really good, then they might find Lent hard, focusing on the more somber things. But it's good to intentionally do that even when life is going great. Whereas if we flip it and life is going hard, then the Easter season might be the struggle, the focus on life, joy, celebration. But we do these things intentionally so that we don't just get lost in whatever life is throwing at us, but we remember the goodness of God in both of those spaces.
You know, the thing that I found interesting and what you're talking about is that word intentionality, being intentional around it. So I think with the season of Lent, in some respects, it's kind of easy to know how to perhaps, fast from something. We talk about giving something up for Lent. But then when it comes to intentional celebration, if we're going into the season of Easter, what does that kind of look like for an individual or even a community or family?
That's a really good question because the Easter season doesn't have practices rolled into it in the same way that Lent does. Like, it's not like you get to Easter and then all of a sudden you've been fasting. So now you get to eat all these wonderful foods, but do it in probably moderation. But
Yeah.
I like the fact that traditionally it's known as a feast. The celebratory times in the calendar are known as feasts. So we're in essentially a feast that lasts up until May 19. And whilst there aren't any intentional practices that are woven into that, if you go along to traditional churches, there's readings that lift to that, there's liturgy that lifts that. The word, it's even little things like the word alleluia or hallelujah. In Lent, you're not allowed to say it. As soon as Easter comes along, you're allowed to say hallelujah again. You're allowed to inject that sense of celebration. So I've started thinking about this and thinking what it means as an individual to celebrate for that period of time. And I wonder what it would look like for families to have people around and have celebratory meals, or for churches to be more intentional about, say, shared lunches and those celebrations that we can participate together through Easter. So I think there is a challenge here to intentionally think about what celebration, what joy and what delight can look like in this time. On another platform that I have, I talked yesterday about delight, what it means to be intentional about delight, actually taking time to pause and to look at the world around us, to be thankful and to take moments of delight. I think the Easter season or Paschaltide calls us to that intentionality around joy and delight and celebration.
Frank, just before we leave this, another aspect that I've been, wrestling with as we work our way through this season is actually humility. And it might seem odd to bring that up, but I was reading about the disciples' responses to, interacting with the resurrected Jesus, and particularly Peter, who'd gone through this denial of Jesus when he was taken away for his trial before his crucifixion, and the humility that you see when Jesus and Peter reconnect after the resurrection. Is that something that we can also consider when we consider the resurrection in this season?
Yeah, I think the resurrection teaches us that as long as we're still breathing, nothing is so far gone that God can't save it. And I think Peter is a really good example of that. That denial of Jesus in some people's minds would be the nail in the coffin. It's done. That's it. He's denied Jesus. He can't come back from that. Yet the resurrected Jesus shows that he can. And it's a wonderfully intimate conversation that Jesus has with Peter in order to restore him, asking him a few times, if you love me, do you love me? And then giving him, not just saying, okay, Peter, we're all good now. He gives him responsibility out of that. Okay, feed my sheep. There's responsibility that comes from that sense of love. So not only does Jesus say, hey, we're all good now, he's saying we're all good to the point where I'm going to trust you with this story. So I think we can all look at the resurrection and what it means for life to overcome death. And we can look at the restoration of Peter and various other stories that play out in the resurrection narrative, and we can go, we are never so far gone that God can't bring us back.
That is just such a lovely reflection there. Frank, thank you so much for joining us on the show and ushering us into this season of Easter. I think for a few of us, we didn't realize we were there still. And also, prompting us to find ways to celebrate and take delight. Really, really appreciate it. Thanks again.
It's a pleasure. Thanks, team.
Thanks for joining us on Rhema. Now, if you found value in today's content, hit that like button. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing to our channel with the subscribe button. This really helps us to continue to produce more quality content for you. And hey, if you'd like to stay updated and never miss any of our future videos, ring that notification bell as well. Don't forget to follow us on our other socials, which are in the description below. And until then, stay tuned.